Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 27th, and we are back for another Tuesday tip. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Pia. I'm an attorney in Northern Virginia, own my own law firm, and every Tuesday I come in and talk about a little something random. And that little something random for today is not actually that random because I did tell you what we're going to talk about last week. We are going to do our first book club discussion. The Reformatory. This is our first book that we're going to read. This is the most informal book club ever, so I don't want you guys to feel pressured. We're not going to have like a full-fledged discussion. We're not going to do this round table. We're not going to do all that. Really what I wanted to do is to highlight some books that I've read that really just kind of touch on legal issues in some way, shape, or form. So while this is a novel, it is fiction, it is based in reality, and that there are some horrors in the juvenile justice system. So for those of you who haven't read it already, I apologize. There are going to be probably some itty bitty spoilers, but you should just go ahead and read it. It is a thick read. It's over 400 pages. I believe it's like 450 pages, maybe 500. Either way, it does go, or at least for me, it went very quickly because it was a good read. It is very heavy. There are topics that are going to be addressed that normally we would drop in something like a trigger warning. So if those things might be of concern to you, just maybe don't read it. At the end, I'm going to mention another book that is along the same vein that doesn't have some of the ghosts that this book has. So one of the things I will say is this is ultimately a ghost story. It's not a horror in the sense that you're like screaming every other page, but it is it's a little scary. If you're a little soft like me and you don't necessarily do a lot of the scary movies and scary books and things like that, this does have a scary undertone to it because there are ghosts. But without getting too much into the actual content of the book, because I do want you to read it for yourselves, okay? I want to talk about why I picked this book. So one of the things that this book truly highlights is the nature of the juvenile justice system. So for children who are charged with criminal offenses and they come through the courts and they end up somewhere, right? It is now 2024. Our system is much different from what it used to be years ago. But we have all heard horror stories, particularly if you grew up as a person of color in this country and you perhaps had any family members who experienced those former versions of the juvenile justice system. It was not uncommon for children to be sentenced to essentially labor camps where they would have to build various things, manufacture certain things, but there was also a variety of abuses that would occur, sexual and physical. So there are a number of laws in place now regarding, prisoner rape and prisoner violence, things of that nature. There's just a lot that has occurred over the course of the years in our justice system, but particularly with our juvenile justice system. There's also reasons why children are supposed to be kept in separate facilities and not in facilities with adults. One of the things that I think a lot of people do not realize is that in Virginia, the Department of Juvenile Justice is a state agency. So what does that mean? Pia, why is that important? So that is important because ultimately the director of the Department of Juvenile Justice is someone who is going to be a political appointee. So I say this, I feel like every couple of weeks, but this is why elections matter. So every couple of years, you're going to have a new director of the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice. And that director is going to set in place certain policies, procedures, everything that's going to govern children who have been sentenced or committed to the juvenile prison system in Virginia. So anybody who lives around Richmond, you may have heard of Bonaire. That is one of the facilities for our children to go to if you are sentenced, if you are committed to the Department of Juvenile Justice. Now, aside from the Department of Juvenile Justice, you're going to have local facilities. So you're going to have local detention facilities, and those are usually going to be secured and unsecured. Part of the point of the juvenile justice system is that it is a rehabilitative system. We're not just supposed to find a child guilty of an offense and then sentence them to 6 months in jail. That's not what we're supposed to do, or that's not what our courts are supposed to do. What we are supposed to be doing is finding the the things that a child needs in order to rehabilitate them. So that could be things like family counseling, um, job training, school. There's a lot of children who, for whatever reason, have been suspended or expelled from schools, and getting that education is extremely important. And so a lot of these things just need to be addressed. And so at your local level, you are going to have detention facilities, and sometimes those are 15 minutes away from where the family may live, and sometimes those are 45 minutes away, just depending upon whether or not is a detention facility that is serving a region or a particular county in and of itself. So in some of our more rural areas, it might be one facility that is serving the entire like 4 or 5 counties or 4 or 5 cities. Down in Hampton Roads, there's one facility. There's really 2 main facilities. There's like one in Virginia Beach and one in Newport News. And so you have children being held at those, but for offenses that occurred across the Hampton Roads area. So I say all of this to say, elections matter. Any child who is committed to a state agency or to a local agency for any sort of criminal offense and things of that nature, it is very important to work with an attorney. Children are presumed to be indigent in Virginia, so children are entitled to a public defender or to court-appointed counsel in those jurisdictions that do not have public defenders. And so this is also why I say give your public defender a chance. I did a significant amount of this work of juvenile indigent defense, and I feel very passionately about it. And so it is something that you just really want to be careful with and mindful of, because that is something that comes up in the book. Part of the reason why the young man in the novel ends up in the facility, or I won't say part of the reason, it's one little thing. He probably would have ended up there regardless because of how the judge chose to act. But this young man did not have the opportunity to have an attorney to represent his interests. So he did not have someone speaking on his behalf. When he had a family member who tried to do so, her efforts were shot down very quickly. And again, spoilers, sorry, read the book. But it all just goes back to, it's very important to work with an attorney who is very knowledgeable and is just very comfortable working with you as the adult in the situation. You may be the parent, you may be the legal guardian, but because Virginia has such an interesting system in terms of how we treat our children, it's very important to know what your options are. Now, I mentioned earlier, for those of you who maybe don't like ghosts, you don't really want to do all of that, but you're still interested in a book that talks about, children ending up in an unfortunate juvenile justice prison boot camp type situation. Also a very traumatic read. I'm just going to give you that warning off the top. But The Nickel Boys by Colton Whitehead is also an extremely good book. I read it a couple years ago when it first came out. Very good, very quick read, but again, a little traumatic. So that's it for today, guys. Come back next week. I will tell y'all what our next book will be. As always, if you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. And in the meantime, stay safe, drink your water. Come back next week for the Tuesday tip. Take care, y'all.